Hey guys, so today I want to do a guide on Shen, basically talking about his runes, summoner spells, and itemization. So first off, with Shen's runes, they're pretty straightforward. You're almost always going to take Grasp and Shield Bash into basically every matchup. These last two rows are pretty interchangeable depending on the enemy comp and enemy champs. So first off, we have Conditioning. I almost never take Conditioning. It's a super greedy rune to take because you basically don't have a rune until 12 minutes. And Shen is pretty susceptible to poke and burst, so that's why I recommend either taking Second Wind or Bone Plating otherwise. The only time I'd ever take Conditioning would be into another tank matchup where you're safe and you just plan on scaling instead. That's the only time where I'd ever take it. For Second Wind, I take it versus champs that have a lot of poke in their kit or range champs. So for example, Fiora is going to be queuing you a lot in lane, same with GP, or range champs like Kennen, Akshan, or God forbid you fight a Vayne top. You're going to need that regen over time, especially since they're going to be like attacking you a lot, right? So that's when I take Second Wind. And then last off, we have Bone Plating. I take Bone Plating into matchups where champs have burst. So for example, Jax can EU, auto attack you a couple times and then back off. Same with Set. So you can EU, auto attack you a couple times, maybe W. And Bone Plating helps negate that like burst of damage, which can help Shen sustain in lane more and keep him in lane longer, which is what you want. You don't want to take a bad back versus like those champs, and Bone Plating helps negate that, and it's especially good if you're trading into them as well. Next up, we have the last row, which we have Overgrowth, Revitalize, and Unflinching. I think Overgrowth is overall generally a good rune on Shen. It gives you health, and health scales with your passive and your ult. So yeah, it's overall pretty good, but there are better options depending on your team comp and enemy team comp for this. Next up, we have Revitalize. So I do believe Revitalize is actually better than Overgrowth if you have more enchanters on your team. So if you have like Ivern Jungle, for example, or like Rakan or Janna support, Revitalize is going to give you a lot of value, and it's going to be better than Overgrowth in those cases because it also empowers your shields. So I take Revitalize into comps where your team has a lot of healing or shielding. And then Unflinching, I personally like to take this rune a lot because there's a lot of CC in the meta right now, and that extra tenacity can help Shen a lot of times, whether it be to avoid a gank, diving in, maneuvering around a team fight, etc. I think that extra tenacity does help Shen a lot. So, but again, it's up to you, and this last row is like really flexible. So next up we have the Red Tree. I think this is a staple for Shen. You're obviously going to go cheap shot. You can proc it a lot with your empowered Q when it passes through somebody, and your E. So it gives Shen a surprising amount of damage in more extended trades. And then next up we have Ultimate Hunter. I think Ultimate Hunter is you're obviously going to take it on Shen so you can ult more. It's basically a must-take rune. You can basically have it permanently up towards like the later stage of the game when the cooldown's like shortened. And for these last three rows we have, I personally go attack speed, adaptive force, and depending on who I'm facing, armor, health, or MR. I've seen some Shens go double adaptive force, that's fine, but I feel like without the attack speed rune, if you don't get your empowered Q, your attack speed feels really slow and it can be kind of hard to CS properly. So it's kind of up to you. I just like the attack speed rune. And then yeah, for these last three, I go health if there's either true damage top lane or mixed damage top jungle. I go armor if they're double AD top side, and MR if they're double AP top side. For example, like Maokai Lilia, or like if they're AD, it's like Darius and Viego or something like that. That's when I'd go armor. And the true damage would be into champs like Fiora or Olaf. Yeah, that's pretty much the runes. For summoner spells, Shen's always gonna have always gonna have flash and ignite or TP. I'd go TP into matchups where you're playing to just survive lane and play for your team. So for matchups like range matchups, you're obviously not going to have a lot of kill pressure on Shen versus those, or matchups where you're uncomfortable. That's when I go TP. And then on the flip side, I would go Ignite into matchups where you need to generate a lead or where you have an advantage in. So Shen wins matchups like Renekton and Jax, for example, so you should take Ignite into those matchups so you can actually get a lead and snowball it. And Shen loses to champions like Gwen and Fiora later, so you need to generate that advantage early in order to stall their like late game and split pushing as much as possible. I've had a couple games where if you go even in lane with Fiora or Gwen, they're eventually going to be like 3 plates up because you ulted, 40 CS up, or something like that, and then they're going to have a huge impact in the side lane where you can't do anything to them. So I think generating a lead with Ignite is super important in some of those matchups. And yeah, I'll talk about itemization next. So for itemization on Shen, you're going to start off with D-Shield and Pot. If you face Nasus or Kale, you can go deeply instead to apply more pressure. And then you're looking to back on 1300 gold to get Bambi Cinder and Boots. Bambi Cinder is a really important component on Shen because it gives them some much needed wave clear. But you're not going to finish it and instead work towards your mythic item. So for mythics, there's a couple options. I didn't include Hearthstone here because I think it's a bad item overall. It only gives health and no defensive stats, which is pretty bad in a meta with champions that deal like percentage max health damage. So Fiora passive, Gwen passive, Blazing Rune King, Divine Sunder, all those things just counter the item, and it doesn't offer any utility. All it does is give whoever builds it just bonus damage and health every 30 seconds, which I think is pretty useless. I think the only chance you'd ever build that on is probably like Scion or Cho'Gath, and it's just really bad for Shen. I don't recommend it if you want to climb, but if you want to build it, I mean, go for it. Next up, we have Radiant Virtue. I think this is more of a supportive item mythic on Shen, and if that is your playstyle, that's fine. I personally don't build it just because I prefer playing more aggressively. Just be warned, if you do build this item, you're going to be fairly squishy because it only gives you 30 armor and MR. It's not like Jack Show where it gives you like bonus if you stay in combat longer, and it doesn't have any of the combat utility of Iceborne. So if you only build this if you're playing strictly for the team, which some Shens do, and I think it's okay in that case. Next up, we have Jack Show. This is more of a specific matchup item. I only build it into champions like Gwen, Mordekaiser, and Kennen, where Iceborne would be really bad because the armor is basically useless. But outside of that, after all the nerfs, I think Jack Show isn't like a must buy anymore, and it's only bought in like those specific matchups. Lastly, we have Iceborne. I think this is the best mythic for Shen. The Sheen effect's really nice for damage. The slow is really good for repositioning your Qs. And the mythic passive also has a really nice bonus of tenacity, health, and slow resist. And the armor, the 50 flat armor is also really good in an 80 bruiser dominant meta right now with like Aatrox, for example. And then yeah, so some example builds, you're gonna look for like these three core items in Boots. So against an 80 heavy team comp, you're gonna go Iceborne, Boots, finish Bambi's into Sunfire, and then Randuin's. And then the last two items are really up to you. It's up to your judgment. If the enemy team has like 1 AP threat, for example, Anathemas is good. If you need more damage, Satanic is good. Or if you need anti-heal, Bramble, and then finishing Thornmail last is also viable. It's just up to you. But like these three items plus the boots here are core. And then next up, we can talk about an example full build versus an 80 top with enemy mages on the team, or AP damage on the team, for example. So you finish Iceborne, Merc Treads, or Steel Caps. That's up to you again. And then instead of finishing Sunfire, you go Abyssal next. I think this is a really good item Shen, by the way, just because it's really cheap, and it gives Shen, it helps Shen's tankiness for MR. It gives like a lot of MR if you're in the middle of a team, and it helps your mages deal more damage because it drains it. And then we finish Sunfire third, and then like this is basically your core versus AP, with like mixed damage team comp. And then the last items are up to you. If you find that the 80 damage is threatening now, then you go Randuin's. If you find out they only have 1 threat, Anathemas. Or if you need overall general tankiness, then Gargoyles is your next best bet. But yeah, these three core items for that sort of build. And then lastly, we have full build versus an AP heavy team. Or like I mentioned earlier, in like the matchup with Gwen, Mordekaiser, or Kennen, would be your ideal build. So you're looking for Jack Show first, and then Merc Treads probably a lot of time in this case, and then Abyssal third. Same reasoning as above. And then if they have 180 champ, which they most likely do, I don't think teams usually draft all AP. This is where you go Anathemas, third item. And then the rest of the items are really up to you, but this is going to be your core. So you can finish Bambi's into Sunfire if you need more pushing power, and you need armor as well. Or you can go Titanic for damage. This is really the only damage item you can build on Shen. I remember I used to build Wit's End when it used to heal on hit, but after it got changed, this is really the only viable, like, I guess, tank damage item you can build on Shen now. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You're gonna, like, Shen's build is pretty straightforward in terms of your core, and then it can be pretty flexible depending on what you need to do. If you need to shut down one person, Anathemas is always good. If you need general tankiness, Gargoyles later is really good. If you need damage or the ability to split push better, Titanic is viable.